Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in for Richard French. Ever since Roe v. Wade in 1973, when the Supreme Court established a constitutional right to an abortion, it has been the hottest of hot-button issues. It still is, and it remains a litmus test for people on both sides of the aisle. This morning, the Roberts Supreme Court agreed to hear a major new abortion case out of Mississippi, one that is considered a direct challenge to Roe. The case, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, concerns a law enacted by Republicans in that state that bans the procedure after 15 weeks of pregnancy and does so with few exceptions. Several red states have been trying to dramatically restrict abortions, in many cases doing so successfully. And their goal is to get their cases to the top court in the land, hoping to get rid of Roe once and for all. Mississippi, no exception. Back in 2018, a federal judge blocked the 15-week law and issued this statement, quote, "The state chose to pass a law it knew was unconstitutional to endorse a decades-long campaign fueled by national interest groups to ask the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade." And now Republicans in Mississippi are getting their wish. The Supreme Court will hear the case in the fall, with a ruling expected next year. And with conservatives now holding a 6-3 majority, this after Trump nominee Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed late last year, women's rights advocates have serious cause for concern. Our first guest tonight is one of them. Nicole Brener-Schmitz is a former national political director for NARAL Pro-Choice America. Nicole, this Mississippi case that the Supreme Court has agreed to take up, is this the big one so many have been fearing for so long? Is this a case that could end Roe versus Wade or just do more damage to it?
No, this is serious. This could end Roe v. Wade. This goes right at the heart and core of what Roe is and the protections that it provides, and it strikes it down. There's probably as many as 24 states that would attempt to ban abortion outright. There's already 11 states that have trigger laws, which means if this was to go through SCOTUS, these would automatically take place in those states. So this is the most serious threat we've seen come to Roe in a long time.
Just last June, the court ruled 5-4 against a Louisiana law that restricted abortion access. Of course, since then, the court lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg and added Amy Coney Barrett. That followed another ruling that protected abortion rights in 2016. The timing of these cases isn't a coincidence. The anti-abortion movement has been queuing these cases and these laws up to test the court every time its membership changes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We saw the AG of Mississippi bring this back during Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings. They knew the shift that was going to be happening on the court, and the anti-choice movement is certainly trying to take full advantage of that, which is why it's incredibly crucial that the Democratic House and Senate pass the Women's Health Protection Act, which would be legislation that could protect against these laws.
Are any of the Trump court members wild cards in your mind? I seem to recall Brett Kavanaugh, before his controversial confirmation, assuring Susan Collins that he thought Roe was settled law and that he would respect long-established precedent. I'm guessing you don't expect him to rule that way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know what's in Brett Kavanaugh's mind, but we've seen how he wrote and spoke about abortion for years leading up to his confirmation hearings. And the choice movement repeatedly cited the fact that this was misleading and that this was untrue. There was nothing about his history, either in politics or as a judge, that made it seem that he thought Roe was actually settled. In fact, he had writings that showed the other way. So this was a warning sign that the choice community had put up about all three of Trump's nominees, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, that they did not think this was settled law, and this is what would happen.
The Mississippi law that the court is taking on would ban abortion after 15 weeks. But the court said it was going to examine whether, and this is a quote, all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. What does that mean to you? Is that the open invitation that they could just tear down all of Roe all the way through, or hold up any restriction any state wants to put in place?
Yeah, I think it's an open invitation to take a look at a number of different challenges that are happening in different states that are coming up through the courts. And I think this is a goal of these judicial nominees. There was a litmus test put forward by President Trump and regarding who he would nominate to the court, and that they had to be someone who was anti-choice. And this is the fulfillment of that. And this is something that the Democrats need to take a hard look at. In that Democrats for a long time have ignored how important judicial nominees are up and down the courts, from the appeals to the Supreme Court. And we haven't funded state legislative races to the tune that Republicans have. And that's changed a bit recently, but we really need to understand how important state legislative chambers are and how important judicial nominees are to the politics of this country. It's not just about having a majority in the House.
I know that you and a lot of pro-choice advocates are going to say a 15-week cap is, it's going to put a lot of women in a difficult position. Some people are going to hear 15 weeks and say that doesn't sound unreasonable. Give a little context. Why is that so oppressive or so difficult for so many?
I mean, that's still in the first trimester. It just outside of that. This is something that is deeply personal to each woman in each case. We cannot be deciding at the courts what women should or shouldn't do with their bodies. Women know what's best for them and their families, and it should be a choice between them and their doctor at any point in the pregnancy when they feel this is the decision they need to make.
So what does a United States without Roe versus Wade as precedent look like? And we may wind up in a situation, blue states have been trying to protect abortion rights and abortion access through their own legislation. Could we wind up with red state and blue states having different laws when it comes to abortion policies?
Yes, absolutely. We could wind up with states having different policies about who and when you can access this reproductive health care. And what you're going to find is a lot of communities, primarily people who are lower economics and a lot of communities of color that are going to have a lot of trouble having access. And you're going to have a certain economy, a middle class and maybe the upper middle class, who are going to be able to access that reproductive care by going to Canada or being able to travel to another state and afford that ability. It's sickening. It's sad.
Finally, you work currently as a Democratic strategist, and as you've noted throughout the interview, it's kind of impossible to separate abortion policy from abortion politics. As you've noted, we've been getting warning signs about Roe for 2 decades, if not longer, but it always seemed like a more distant threat. If the court overturns or seriously punctures Roe, what's the impact on both our national politics, but also on these growing calls to expand or alter the court itself?
Yeah, I think that you're going to see support for what the court looks like and how it changes grow. I mean, the reality is that 70% of Americans support a woman's right to choose. We have done 1 million polls nationally in individual states across all kinds of different communities, and the majority of Americans do believe a woman should have the right to choose. This will fire up a whole generation, because you're right. I think there has been a little bit of a lackadaisical amongst some, because they always grew up in a world that had Roe and had that access, and to all of a sudden be faced and without it changes your worldview on the importance of having reproductive health options. And this is not a generation of women who are my age or younger that have actually been in America that didn't have that kind of access. So you're going to see it become incredibly important within the Democratic politics.
And we go through issues all the time, from guns to the border to taxes, and often we'll come to the conclusion, yeah, but that's not necessarily a voting issue. It doesn't drive people to the polls. Abortion is a voting issue. Abortion does drive people to the polls, yes?
Yes, absolutely. It's crucial health care for women, and it drives folks on both sides to the polls.
Nicole Brener-Schmitz is a Democratic strategist. She's also a former political director for NARAL, the oldest abortion rights advocacy group in the United States. Really appreciate the time, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, an update on COVID. The former head of the Centers for Disease Control will join us to discuss the CDC's messaging on masks, the effectiveness of the vaccine, and more.